Hey, what's going on, guys? I'm going to talk to you today about countering Bruce Cumings' book, The Korean War. Okay, he wrote the book in about 2010. He wrote the book in 2010, but I'm here to counter a lot of that book. And the reason I'm going to say that is that the book is very one-sided, because it really downplays the massacres that North Korea committed during the Korean War. Okay, when North Korea captured Seoul on June 28, 1950, British historian Max Hastings notes that a lot of the people in Seoul, they were very welcoming to the North Korean invaders. All they knew was that they thought they were going to get food, because they saw that communism meant distributing stuff and distributing food and money, because their knowledge of communism was very vague because they were under Japanese occupation for so long that Japan really limited a lot of the information they could have about the outside world. But the people in Seoul learned pretty quickly that communism was not that. That communism was a very cruel and oppressive way of governing somebody, where the North Koreans massacred 25,000 people in Seoul in 3 months. 25,000 people in 3 months. Bruce Cumings does not note that. He only notes that there were graves of about 200 to 300 people, that 200 to 300 innocent people that the North Koreans killed. That's all he notes, and there were a lot more that the North Koreans killed. He does not mention the Seoul National Medical Center massacre, where 700 to 900 doctors, wounded soldiers, and patients were massacred when North Korea first took over Seoul. And he does not mention that. He just does not mention that, and he needs to, okay? All right, one thing where the United States as well as South Korea get a bum rap for, where they get a bad reputation, is that they had a man patrol the DMZ, the 30th parallel, before the Korean War, a guy by the name of Kim Suk-won. Okay, he was in the South Korean Army, and yes, he did serve in the Japanese Army during World War II. But the reason he patrolled that border was because he knew how to fight guerrillas. Okay, he countered a lot of the guerrillas during World War II. Now, he was on the wrong side, I agree. He fought for the Japanese Army, he fought for the wrong side. But the United States, as well as South Korea, needed him to help counter guerrilla warfare, because North Korea was sneaking alongside the past 30th parallel. They were trying to infiltrate South Korea before the Korean War. South Korea caught a lot of North Korean infiltrators trying to come in and trying to conquer South Korea even before the Korean War. Also, he does note that South Korea did fire most of the shots along the 38th parallel before the Korean War, about 51% of the shots, maybe more. That is true. However, when the Korean Peninsula was divided, North Korea cut off electricity to the south. And this was during the time where North Korea had between 75 and 90% of all the electric plants, because Japan, during the colonial period, Japan developed North Korea. They did not develop South Korea. They treated South Korea's economy like a breadbasket. But when South Korea said, no, we're not becoming communist, we're not uniting with you guys under communism, North Korea cut off electricity. Plain and simple. So South Korea had a right to be angry about that situation. Bruce Cumings does not note that. A lot of what I'm talking about here, particularly on the electricity sense, Victor Cha notes that in his book, The Impossible State. Victor Cha is a tenured professor at Georgetown with a PhD. Bruce Cumings has his PhD, but so does Victor Cha. And Victor Cha also notes a lot of the reasons that there were Japanese collaborators within the South Korean government during that time. It was one word: expediency. Okay, the United States defense budget went from $82 billion to $13 billion. The United States did not have a lot of time to get a lot of their soldiers to the Korean Peninsula, even before the Korean War, and they had to have a certain government and infrastructure. It was done for one word: expediency. They had no other choice. Because during that time, it took the United States a lot of effort to beg the Soviet Union to come and fight Japan in World War II. Excuse me. The Soviet tongue twister, but I caught myself. The Soviet Union wouldn't fight against Japan. They would not fight them. They would not fight them. They would not fight them. But the United States said, "Look, we will give you the Sakhalin and the Kuril Islands if you come help us fight Japan." And the Soviet Union agreed. But the Soviet Union only fought against Japan for 3 months and 3 days. The United States had fought against Japan for almost 4 years. Bruce Cumings does not note that. Okay, and also the United States sold and gave the Soviets a lot of fuel at very generous prices during World War II. That information I found from A Patriot's History of the United States by Larry Schweikart. He has his PhD as well, professor of history at the University of Dayton. And the information about the Soviets having to be promised the Kuril and the Sakhalin Islands, a book called Under the Fatherly Care of the Dear Leader by Bradley K. Martin. Bradley K. Martin's a journalist who's traveled regularly to North Korea. He notes that, okay? Bruce Cumings does not note a lot of that in his book, The Korean War. He also does not note, he does talk about the Jeju massacre, and before I get into any more details, the South Korean soldiers overreacted in the Jeju massacre. It occurred on April 3rd, 1948. But the protesters in Jeju began those incidents. They burned 11 police stations to the ground. The South Korean soldiers retaliated too heavily. They need a memorial and a museum in Jeju, which they do have, and it should be funded by taxpayers, which it is. The South Korean soldiers overreacted. And he vaguely notes there was a militia unit, though. The Northwest Youth Anti-Communist League. He vaguely mentions it and mentions it very, very, very sarcastically. Okay? Very sarcastically. But those people from the militia, the Northwest Youth Anti-Communist League, they were refugees from North Korea. They saw Kim Il-sung's brutality and viciousness firsthand. So when these people get to Jeju, and they see people waving North Korean flags, which the Jeju protesters were. They're protesting the UN elections because the United Nations elections in South Korea would not allow pro-North Korean parties. Now, you could argue if that was the most democratic move or not, but the United Nations wouldn't allow it. And people in Jeju were waving North Korean flags. They were praising Kim Il-sung. Well, these militia members from the Northwest Youth Anti-Communist League saw Kim Il-sung's brutality and oppression firsthand. That's why they fled to South Korea. Also, Sungmin Rhee, the first president of South Korea, I was critical of a lot of his policies because he was not democratic at all in a lot of ways. But at the same time, more freedoms than in North Korea, definitely. But then the second thing is he was in exile in the United States when Japan occupied Korea. So he did not collaborate with the Japanese government. The U.S. let him live in exile. The U.S. let him live in exile, and during that time, he obtained a PhD from Princeton University. So, anyways, hope everybody's doing well, and take care, and God bless, and bye-bye. Bye-bye.